I'm Mark Brokaw. I'm the director of Crybaby.
And I'm Rob Ashford. I'm the choreographer of Crybaby.
It's about the drapes and the squares and the conflict between those two, the haves and the have-nots. And what is it? He says it's a Romeo and Juliet from the wrong side of the tracks. Because it's about a boy from the wrong side of the tracks and a girl from the right side of the tracks. And as far as being, I mean, the dance is incredibly sexy that's in it, but I think the drapes are sexy. I think the thing that makes them dangerous is that not only are they non-conformists, but they kind of wear their sexuality on their sleeve, which I think in the 50s was a very dangerous thing to do. And I think that that's what makes them sexy, because they're a little naughty, they're irreverent, and they're just a little dangerous because they march to their own drummer.
I think it's always so interesting, that idea of groups that are at opposite ends being attracted to something about the other group. I mean, you think of the great patrons of the arts and the great artists, you know. There's something about that lifestyle of an artist that the people that have all the cash are attracted to somehow. And the same for the artist. The artist is so drawn to the security of having money. So I think that's the same with the drapes and the squares, though there's something, and Allison actually speaks it for us. She's the one that says, I admire your open mind. I admire your freedom. They admire certain qualities about each other. And, you know, if Allison and Crybaby feel that way, you know the rest of them feel that way too, at least a little bit. And then that's the story, to try to let everyone get in touch with those feelings. Well, I think it's always interesting when you have two such diverse groups, the squares and the drapes, and they're living in the same world. So it's kind of fun to watch these two parallel worlds going beside each other and then overlap. So that's a fun thing to explore. And I know, and as far as the dancing goes and the movement, that was a fun thing to try to figure out. How do the squares move? How do the drapes move? And what do they do when they get together?
And I also think it's a celebration of nonconformity. I think just like all of his pieces are, they always champion the outsider, and I think this piece does that also. Yeah. And also I just think it's, you know, at its heart, it's like a little bit of rebellion isn't a bad thing, and I think it kind of champions that also.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
Well, you know, I think we've tried really hard to honor the irreverent streak, the John Waters world. But I think that it's like anytime you take a book or you take a movie, or it's about condensing. It's about telescoping the story down, because the canvas is so much larger. And so it was about aligning characters together and getting rid of some characters and just choosing which parts of the story to tell, because there are more threads, I think, to the story in the movie. And so it's about what was possible in the 2 hours on the stage to really be able to tell. And
although the film is a musical, really, it's not a traditional musical. So the show has a more traditional musical structure as far as the way you get into the songs. That songs are, sometimes they're performance pieces, like, you know, the Whiffles performing at the country club, or the Whiffles performing at Star Spangled Funland. But sometimes they're like a book song. It's someone's emotion, what they're feeling, what they're thinking at that moment. And so we tried to integrate the music, obviously, more into the story than the film did, I think.
That's very true, because I think they were all performance.
I think they were all performance-oriented in the film.
4 years ago?
It might be 4 years that we first all started meeting and saying we're going to do Crybaby.
I think it was 4 years that 4 years ago the producers put the team together. And it's taken a fairly traditional path in that way. We did a couple of readings in town, and then we did...
a reading is just where you know, 29 hours of rehearsal, you just music stands and you just sing the music and say the lines, and you don't do any staging or any dancing or anything.
Yeah, just to really see what you got. And then we had an out-of-town...
we did a workshop, too.
Oh, workshop, that's right.
We did a workshop,
I forgot about that.
Full-scale workshop.
Full-scale workshop for 4 weeks.
Yeah, but we put the whole show on its feet, just so we could see how it moved, and also how to try to develop a set around it, and something that you know, was friendly to the story we were telling. And also, we used it to actually, we had a design that we'd actually had on paper, and we used the workshop to actually test that out and to see how it worked, which is really valuable. It was really valuable. And the workshop just took us up to what you would see in a rehearsal hall after 4 weeks of rehearsal, and then that's how far the workshop goes. And then we went to La Jolla and had a full-scale production in the fall, and we rehearsed here in New York for 5 weeks, and then we went to La Jolla, and it ran for, what, 5 weeks? Yeah, something
I think,
like that.
yeah. And now we're here.
I mean, well, you always, as far as the dancing goes, you always try to do research of the period just to see, what was happening then, what people were doing in public, what people were doing in private, what was going on. So you want to use that. I think it's a very, very loose template. But you really want, you have to have, nobody wants to see historical dancing anything. I guarantee you. You want to have the feel of the time, and you want to see the energy of right now, or I think it can be kind of boring. So yeah, the research was done to know what was going on, but just to use loosely as a base, I think, as far as the dancing goes.
And also, I think the 50s was, the time of Eisenhower, the time of, our stories as squares versus the drapes, and so it was it's a very tight world versus a very loose, free world. And so one of our big challenges was how to physically represent that on stage. And our set designer, Scott Pask, came up with a really clever and smart solution where there are a series of portals that frame the action on the stage. And what they do is they actually move. So the shape of the world changes from scene to scene depending on if we're in the square world. So it's a little more upright, constricted, and closes you in. And when we go to the drape world, it all just tilts a little bit. So you feel it, I think. If you aren't noticing it, you subliminally feel how the world kind of shifts as you move through the story. And then we also came across a book that just came out called Shop America that is a beautiful color picture book that came out that is about storefronts and store interiors from the 50s and the 60s. And that actually became our Bible. There's not a color in the set, there's not a color in the costumes that is not in that book. We even had the page numbers. We'd say, okay, the dresses are this page, the set will be this page. So that was a really valuable discovery for us. It kind of keeps it gives you a lot of freedom at the same time, but it keeps everything very specific and what's the right word? Specific
Well, there was that sense we always talked about, when you open up your mom's Betty Crocker cookbook and you look at all those photographs of the food, that those colors are different than the colors now that you would see. So there's something about I'll say innocence, for lack of a better word, of that time, or supposed innocence, that even came through in the colors. The colors are so much more jewel tone than bright colors and so neon, and I think that helps set up the time, I think, as far as the palette goes.
Yeah, we also looked at a lot of illustrations, advertisements of that time period, because they have a very painterly quality to them, and so I think that that is reflected a lot in the paint treatment of how the set has been painted, that it has kind of a brushstroke feeling to it, so it has that feeling from a different time. Oh, listen, I think it's very clear. I was a square who wanted to desperately be a drape, but it was hopeless. It was a hopeless task.
I was a square as well, but I guess well, you know what? When you think about I grew up in West Virginia, and so I guess that even though I felt like a square in my life, I guess in comparison to everyone else, I certainly had more drape-like qualities in that even then I was rebelling a bit. And I don't mean the rebel that, cuts class and does, things like that, but rebelling from the norm of what happened in my town, rebelling from the college that everybody went to, rebelling from the things that everybody did, trying to already find my own way. That's how I ended up in New York, I think. I think that, one thing we really tried hard to do in establishing the world of the squares and the drapes was not to judge either group. So we don't want the audience to sit there and say, okay, the drapes are the winners and the squares are the losers. That was really important. We talked about that so much. They're just different. So, our hopes is that, intermission, some little girl is going to say, I want to be a square, just as much as some little boy might say, I want to be a drape. Because we didn't want the judgment there. So it isn't about winners and losers. It's just about different and how they can meet in the middle or form a new middle.